Marcus Hartwell had everything's a billion-dollar tech empire, a perfect family, unlimited power. But his success was built on the darkest of secrets. 15 years ago, he stole revolutionary code from his best friend Tommy, driving the young Cherokee genius to suicide. When Marcus's helicopter crashes in a violent storm, he washes up on a remote island with complete amnesia. The woman who saves his life, Mary Clearwater, Tommy's sister, who recognizes him immediately but chooses silence over revenge. As Marcus slowly heals and falls deeply in love with Mary, learning the sacred ways of her people, his memories begin to return. What happens when he remembers not just his family waiting for him, but the terrible crime that made his fortune possible? This is a story of love that transcends betrayal, redemption that costs everything, and the price of building an empire on stolen dreams. Get ready for twists that will leave you breathless and an ending that proves sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. If this story moves you, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of love loss and second chances. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. You stole everything from me. Billionaire's dark secret exposed by Island Rescue. The blade pressed deeper into Marcus Hartwell's palm beneath the mahogany conference table. Pain, sharp and immediate. It cut through the fog of anxiety that had been suffocating him for weeks. The Q3 numbers are concerning Marcus. David Chen's voice floated across the room like smoke. Revenue down 12%. User engagement at an all-time low. Marcus kept his face neutral, even as blood seeped between his fingers. The technique had become a ritual, a way to stay present when the weight of his secrets threatened to drown him. 15 years of success built on a foundation of betrayal. 15 years of living with Tommy Clearwater's ghost. Temporary setback, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. The new algorithm update will what? David leaned forward, his son Gabriel typing furiously on a laptop beside him. The 28-year-old intern had been shadowing every board meeting for months, supposedly learning the business. But Marcus had noticed the way Gabriel watched him like a predator studying its prey. The scar on Marcus's wrist, hidden beneath his Italian suit, began to itch. He'd carved it there the night after Tommy's funeral when the guilt had become unbearable. Sarah had found him bleeding in their bathroom, had gotten him help, had never spoken of it again. She knew. She'd always known. The market is changing. Marcus continued, pressing the small blade deeper. We need to adapt our strategy for connecting indigenous communities. Indigenous communities. David's eyebrows shot up. Since when do you care about that demographic? Since I destroyed the man who wanted to build something beautiful for them. Since I stole his dream and watched him die for it. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from his pilot. Weather's turning bad, sir. We should leave for Seattle within the hour. Gentlemen, I need to cut this short. Marcus stood palming the small blade. Emergency acquisition meeting in Seattle. We'll continue this discussion Monday. As he walked toward the door, Gabriel's voice stopped him cold. Mr. Hartwell, I've been researching our company's founding. Fascinating story about how ConnectSphere started. Almost like it was inspired by earlier work. Marcus's blood turned to ice. He turned slowly, meeting Gabriel's dark eyes that reminded him unnervingly of Tommy's intense stare. All innovation builds on what came before, Marcus said carefully. Gabriel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course, especially when the original innovator isn't around to claim credit. The helicopter waited on the roof rotors, spinning against the October sky. San Francisco Bay stretched endlessly below gray water, meeting grayer clouds. Marcus strapped himself in his palm, still bleeding from the self-inflicted wound. Rough flight ahead, sir, his pilot Jake Morrison called over the noise. Storm system moving in from the Pacific. Marcus nodded, lost in thought. The meeting in Seattle was a lie. He needed space to think, to plan. Gabriel Chen knew something. The question was, how much? As they lifted off, Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through old photos. Sarah and Emma at last year's Christmas morning. Emma, now 12, had her mother's sharp intelligence, but Marcus's stubborn streak. She still believed her father was a hero. What would she think if she knew the truth? The helicopter shuddered as they hit turbulence. Through the window, Marcus watched the familiar landmarks of his empire shrink below. ConnectSphere's headquarters built with blood money. His penthouse, a monument to theft. the yacht club where he'd first pitched his original idea to investors, knowing full well he'd stolen every line of code from his best friend. Tommy Clearwater had been a dreamer. Half Cherokee, brilliant beyond measure, passionate about using technology to preserve indigenous culture. His prototype, Spirit Circle, had been elegant, revolutionary, a social network designed to connect scattered tribes, preserve languages, share traditions. Marcus had seen its potential immediately. Not for preserving culture, but for making money. The betrayal had been systematic. Subtle at first, Marcus suggesting improvements that gradually shifted the focus from cultural preservation to mass market appeal. Then bolder moves, copyright filings under Marcus's name, investment meetings, where Tommy was mysteriously excluded, code modifications that Tommy never approved. By the time Tommy realized what was happening, ConnectSphere was already launching. Marcus had prepared for the fight, hiring lawyers, crafting narratives. But Tommy, proud and heartbroken, had chosen a different path. He'd walked off the Golden Gate Bridge on a Tuesday morning in October, 15 years ago today. "Sir," Jake's voice cracked with alarm, "we've got a problem." Marcus looked up to see a wall of black clouds racing toward them from the west. But this wasn't just a storm. The clouds were rotating, forming a narrow funnel that seemed to stretch from sky to sea. A waterspout. A tornado over open water. "Can we get around it?" Marcus shouted. Too late. Jake fought with the controls as the helicopter was caught in the system's edge. "It's pulling us in." The aircraft spun violently. Marcus's harness cut into his chest as centrifugal force pinned him against the door. Through the chaos, he saw the ocean racing up to meet them, dark and hungry. "This is it," he thought with strange clarity. "This is how I pay." "Tommy," he whispered as the helicopter hit the water. "I'm sorry, Tommy." Then darkness swallowed everything. Marcus woke to the sound of waves and the taste of salt in his mouth. Sand pressed against his cheek, warm despite the October chill. Every muscle in his body screamed with pain, but he was alive. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His head felt like it had been split with an axe, and his vision swam sickeningly. Blood crusted his hairline and his expensive suit was torn to shreds. Where was he? The question felt important, urgent, but the answer remained frustratingly out of reach. He could remember falling, spinning, water rushing up to meet him. But before that, nothing. A vast emptiness where his memories should be. "Easy." A voice soft and melodic. Female. "Don't try to move yet." Marcus turned his head slowly and saw her, a woman with long black hair and dark skin, kneeling beside him in the sand. She wore simple clothes, worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt, but there was something regal about her bearing. "You're hurt," she said, reaching toward his head. "Pretty bad concussion. You've been unconscious for 6 hours. Who?" Marcus tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper. "I'm Mary." She held a water bottle to his lips. "Mary Clearwater, and you washed up on my beach." The name stirred something deep in Marcus's damaged mind, a flicker of recognition quickly smothered by pain. I can't remember." He struggled to form words. "My name, I don't know my name." Mary's dark eyes studied his face intently. For a moment, he thought he saw something flash across her features, recognition, anger. But it was gone too quickly to be sure. "That's okay," she said finally. "Head injuries can cause temporary amnesia. It might come back slowly." Marcus looked around, taking in his surroundings for the first time. They were on a small beach surrounded by towering evergreens. No buildings, no signs of civilization. Just pristine wilderness stretching as far as he could see. "Where are we?" "Kahia Island, about 30 miles off the Oregon coast." Mary helped him sit up carefully. "It's isolated. No regular boat service, no phone towers. Just me and the seabirds." "You live here alone." Something shadowed her expression. "I'm the caretaker. This is a protected sanctuary, sacred land for my people. The Cherokee Nation has maintained this place for generations." As she spoke, Marcus caught sight of something glinting in the sand nearby, a piece of twisted metal scorched and bent. Part of the helicopter, he realized with a start. Was I alone in the crash?" Mary followed his gaze to the wreckage. Her voice became gentler. "I found 3 other bodies this morning. I'm sorry." The words hit him like a physical blow. 3 people dead, and he couldn't even remember their names. What kind of man was he that he'd survived when others hadn't? "Come on," Mary said, standing and offering him her hand. "My cabin's not far. You need food, warmth, and rest. The memories will come back when they're ready." As Marcus struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Mary's surprisingly strong frame, he caught her watching him again. There was something in her eyes he couldn't read, a depth that suggested she saw more than she was saying. "Thank you," he managed, "for saving me." Mary was quiet for a long moment as they walked toward the tree line. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said finally, "even when they don't think they do." The cabin was small but well-built, tucked into a clearing surrounded by ancient cedars. Solar panels on the roof, a vegetable garden, fishing nets hanging from poles. Mary had carved out a sustainable life in this remote place. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs and artwork that spoke of deep cultural heritage. Dreamcatcher's traditional Cherokee pottery pictures of what looked like family gatherings and ceremonies. But Marcus noticed something else, several framed newspaper clippings, though he couldn't make out the headlines from across the room. "You can sleep here," Mary said, gesturing to a small alcove with a simple bed. "I'll make some soup. You need to keep your strength up." As she busied herself in the kitchen, Marcus examined his reflection in a small mirror. The face looking back was unfamiliar, not because of the injuries, but because he couldn't connect it to any sense of identity. Brown hair going gray at the temples, lines around the eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights, a small scar on his chin that felt recent. On his wrist was a thin band of pale skin where a watch had been now lost to the ocean. On his ring finger, a similar mark where a wedding band had rested. "I'm married," he realized with a start. "Somewhere someone is wondering where I am." The thought should have brought urgency, panic. Instead, he felt only a strange sense of relief. Whatever life he'd been living, whatever pressures and responsibilities he'd carried, they were gone now, washed away with his memories. "The soup's ready," Mary called. As they ate in comfortable silence, Marcus found himself studying his rescuer. She moved with quiet efficiency, spoke with careful consideration, watched everything with intelligent eyes. There was a sadness about her, something held back, guarded. "How long have you lived here?" he asked. 3 years, since my brother died." The words came out flat, matter of fact, but Marcus caught the pain underneath. "I'm sorry." He was trying to change the world, using technology to preserve our culture, our stories, our connections to each other. Mary stared into her soup, but the world wasn't ready for his vision. People took advantage of his trust. Something cold settled in Marcus's stomach. The story felt familiar somehow, though he couldn't place why. What happened to him? He killed himself. Mary's voice was barely above a whisper. "Jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge 15 years ago today." The spoon slipped from Marcus's hand, clattering against the bowl. A sharp pain lanced through his skull, and for a moment he saw flashes. A man with dark hair and intense eyes, computer screens, angry voices, a bridge disappearing into fog. "Are you okay?" Mary was beside him instantly, her hand on his forehead. I saw something. A bridge, a man." Marcus pressed his palms against his temples. "Does the name Tommy mean anything? I think I knew someone named Tommy." Mary went very still. When Marcus looked up, her face was carefully blank. "Tommy was my brother's name," she said quietly. "Thomas Clearwater. But that's probably just coincidence. A common name." But even as she said it, Marcus saw something in her eyes that told him it was anything but coincidence. Mary Clearwater knew exactly who he was. The question was, why was she pretending not to? That night, as Marcus lay on the narrow bed, listening to the ocean, fragments of memory drifted through his mind like pieces of a broken mirror. A woman with blonde hair laughing. A little girl with pigtails calling Daddy. A man's voice desperate and angry. "You stole everything from me, Marcus. Everything." Marcus, was that his name? And if it was, what had he stolen? The dreams came in fragments over the following days. Flashes of boardrooms and computer screens, the weight of expensive suits, the taste of champagne and the sting of betrayal. But when Marcus woke, the details scattered like mist, leaving only the emotional residue, guilt so heavy, it felt like drowning. Mary tended to his injuries with a combination of modern first aid and traditional remedies that seemed impossibly effective. She made poultices from plants he couldn't identify, brewed teas that eased his headaches, and somehow knew exactly how much pressure to apply when massaging his damaged muscles. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked on his fourth morning as she changed the bandage on his head wound. "My grandmother taught me, and her grandmother taught her." Mary's fingers were gentle but sure. Traditional Cherokee medicine doesn't just heal the body, it heals the spirit too. What if someone's spirit is broken beyond healing? Mary paused in her work. "Why would you ask that?" "I don't know. I feel like I've done something terrible, even though I can't remember what." "The heart remembers what the mind forgets," Mary said softly. "But healing is always possible, even for the worst sins if the remorse is genuine." That afternoon, Mary began teaching him practical skills: how to identify edible plants, how to read weather patterns in the movement of clouds, how to fish without damaging the ecosystem. Marcus discovered he had an aptitude for it that surprised them both. "You learn fast," Mary observed as he successfully started a fire using traditional methods. "Like you already understand the underlying principles." "Maybe I was a Boy Scout," Marcus joked, though something about the comment felt wrong. He had the distinct impression that his previous life had been spent indoors under artificial lights, breathing recycled air. As the days passed, Marcus began to feel something he couldn't name, a settling, a sense of rightness he'd never experienced before. The constant anxiety that seemed hardwired into his nervous system gradually faded. His shoulders, permanently hunched from carrying invisible weight, finally relaxed. Mary noticed the change too. She began sharing more about herself, the island, her people's history. She told him about the ancient village sites hidden in the forest, the burial grounds that demanded respect, the ceremonies that had been performed here for centuries. "This place has power," she said one evening as they watched the sunset from the beach where he'd washed ashore. "It changes people, strips away what's false, reveals what's true." What if someone doesn't want to know what's true about themselves? Then they're not ready for healing. That night, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He wandered outside and discovered Mary sitting by a small fire staring into the flames. Without words, he joined her. "I found something today," she said after a long silence. "In your jacket pocket." She handed him a waterlogged wallet. Inside, his driver's license was barely readable, but Marcus could make out enough: Marcus A. Hartwell, San Francisco, CA. "Marcus," he said, testing the name. It felt familiar, like putting on an old coat. But Mary was looking at something else, a business card that had somehow survived the crash intact. Connect Sphere Technologies. CEO Marcus Hartwell. "You're a tech executive," Mary said, her voice carefully neutral. "I guess I am." Marcus studied the card, but it felt like looking at someone else's life. "Does that bother you?" "Technology isn't evil," Mary said slowly. "It's just a tool, but it can be used to build bridges or burn them down." "Which did I do?" Mary was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she said, "I think you're here to figure that out." They sat in silence until the fire burned down to embers. As they prepared to go inside, Mary touched his arm. "There's something else. In your wallet." She handed him a small photo, a family portrait. A blonde woman and a young girl, both smiling at the camera. Marcus stared at the faces that should have been familiar, should have stirred love and longing. Instead, he felt only a distant sadness, like looking at strangers. "Your family," Mary said. "They must be worried about you." "I should try to contact them." "The mainland is 20 miles away. No radio, no phone service here. But there's an old emergency beacon on the north side of the island. If you really want to leave." Marcus looked at the photo again, then at Mary's face in the firelight. "Not yet," he said. "I'm not ready yet." Relief flickered across Mary's features before she could hide it. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. Marcus learned to see the island through Mary's eyes, not as a wilderness to be tamed, but as a living system to be respected. Every plant, every animal, every stone had its place in a web of connection that stretched back generations. "My brother understood this," Mary said one afternoon as they harvested mussels from the tide pools. "He wanted to use technology to strengthen these connections, not replace them." "Tell me about him." Mary was quiet for a long time, carefully selecting shells. "Tommy was brilliant, a natural programmer, but also deeply spiritual. He saw possibilities where others saw problems." "You loved him very much." He raised me after our parents died, worked 3 jobs to pay for my education while putting himself through Stanford. Mary's voice grew thick. He deserved better than what he got. What happened? He trusted the wrong person, someone who saw his vision as an opportunity for profit rather than service. Mary's hands stilled on the rocks. This person convinced Tommy to share his work, his ideas, his code, then stole everything and claimed it as his own. Marcus felt that familiar cold settling in his stomach. Who? It doesn't matter now. Tommy's gone, and the thief built an empire on stolen dreams. Mary straightened, her expression hardening. But karma has a way of finding people. Sometimes it just takes 15 years. That night, Marcus dreamed more vividly than ever. He saw himself in a dorm room with a young man who looked remarkably like Mary, the same dark eyes, the same intense focus. The young man was showing him lines of code on a computer screen, explaining how social networks could preserve indigenous languages, connect scattered tribes, maintain cultural traditions in a digital age. In the dream, Marcus was fascinated, not by the cultural implications, but by the market potential. He began suggesting changes, tweaks, that would make the platform more commercially viable, more appealing to mainstream users, more profitable. The young man Tommy, his mind supplied, grew increasingly uncomfortable with these suggestions. But Marcus was persistent, persuasive. He had a gift for making exploitation sound like optimization. Marcus woke with tears on his cheeks and the taste of betrayal in his mouth. The breakthrough came during a storm. The weather had been building for days, dark clouds gathering on the horizon, winds picking up animals seeking shelter. Mary had prepared the cabin, battening down shutters and securing loose items. "This is going to be a big one," she said, watching the barometric pressure drop on an old analog gauge. "The kind that changes the landscape." They spent the day reinforcing their preparations. As evening approached, the first bands of rain began lashing the island. The wind howled through the trees with increasing fury, and the ocean transformed from gray to black waves, crashing with enormous force against the rocky shore. "Stay away from the windows," Mary warned as they settled in to wait out the storm. But around midnight, a section of the roof began to leak. Water poured through in a steady stream, threatening Mary's collection of family photographs and cultural artifacts. "I have to get up there," she said, grabbing a tarp and rope. "In this weather, you'll be killed. Those pictures are all I have left of my family. I'm not losing them." Before Marcus could stop her, Mary was out the door and climbing onto the roof. He followed without thinking, his body moving on instincts he didn't know he possessed. On the roof, the wind was tremendous, threatening to tear them loose and fling them into the darkness. Rain stung like needles and lightning illuminated the chaos in stark, frozen moments. Mary was struggling with the tarp, her hands numb with the cold. Marcus crawled to her side, and together they fought to secure the covering over the leak. At one point, a particularly strong gust nearly swept Mary off the roof. Marcus lunged forward, catching her hand just as she started to slide. For a moment, they hung there, Marcus anchoring Mary as the storm raged around them. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. They made it down safely, soaked and shaking, but victorious. Inside the cabin, they stripped out of their wet clothes and huddled together by the fire, sharing warmth and adrenaline. "Thank you," Mary whispered against his chest, "for risking yourself to save what matters to me. I couldn't let you do it alone. Most people would have. I'm not most people." Even as he said it, Marcus wondered if that was true. What kind of person had he been before the crash? Would that Marcus have risked himself for someone else's memories? "No," Mary agreed, her fingers tracing the scar on his wrist. "You're not." They made love that night with the storm raging outside, desperate and tender, as if they were the only two people left in the world. Afterward, as Mary slept in his arms, Marcus stared at the ceiling and felt something shift inside him. A wall crumbling, a door opening to possibilities he'd never imagined. He was falling in love with Mary Clearwater, and somehow he knew it was going to destroy them both. The memories returned in a flood 3 days later. Marcus was helping Mary repair storm damage when he found a piece of metal debris that had been blown inland, part of the helicopter's instrument panel, with the ConnectSphere logo still visible. The sight hit him like a physical blow. Suddenly, everything came rushing back: his real name, his company, his family, his crimes. He dropped to his knees on the wet sand as 15 years of suppressed guilt crashed over him. Sarah, Emma, his wife and daughter who thought he was dead. They'd been searching for him, mourning him while he'd been playing house with the sister of the man he'd murdered. Because that's what it was, Marcus realized with crystal clarity. He hadn't pulled the trigger or pushed Tommy off the bridge, but he'd killed him just the same, systematically, deliberately, cruelly. Marcus, Mary was beside him, concern in her voice. What's wrong? He looked up at her beautiful, trusting face and felt his heart shatter. I remember, he said simply. I remember everything. Mary went very still. Everything. I know who you are, Mary, and I know what I did to your brother. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The waves continued their eternal rhythm. Gulls cried overhead, the world kept turning. But between them, everything had changed. How long have you known, Marcus asked. Who I was. Mary sank down beside him in the sand. From the first day. I found your watch in the wreckage, the one engraved with your initials. The same initials that were on all the court documents, all the patents that should have been Tommy's. Why didn't you let me drown? I thought about it. Mary's voice was barely audible over the waves. For about 30 seconds, I thought about walking away, letting the ocean have you. Why didn't you? Because that's not who I am, and because... She met his eyes. Because I wanted to understand how someone could do what you did. I wanted to see if there was any humanity left in you. And you're not the man who killed my brother, Mary said softly. That man was hollow, driven by greed and ego. You've become someone else. Someone Tommy would have liked. Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. I have to go back. My family. I know. I have to face what I've done. I know. And we can never. I know. They sat in silence as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of endings. Tomorrow Marcus would activate the emergency beacon. Tomorrow he would return to a world that believed him dead. Tomorrow he would begin the long process of atonement. But tonight, for just a few more hours, he was just a man who had learned to see the world through different eyes, sitting beside a woman who had taught him what it meant to be truly alive. I love you, he said, because it was true and because he might never get another chance to say it. I love you too, Mary replied, both the man you were and the man you've become. And that's what makes this so hard. As darkness fell, they walked back to the cabin, hand in hand, knowing it would be the last time. The emergency beacon signal reached the Coast Guard at 0600 hours. By noon, a helicopter was circling the island, and by sunset, Marcus Hartwell was being transported back to a world that had given him up for dead. The media circus was immediate and overwhelming. Billionaire CEO survives helicopter crash. Lone survivor found after 6 weeks. Stock prices soared on the news that ConnectSphere's founder was alive. But Marcus barely noticed the cameras and microphones thrust in his face. His attention was focused entirely on the two figures waiting at the hospital. Sarah, thinner than he remembered, her blonde hair showing gray roots she'd never have allowed before. And Emma, his 12-year-old daughter, who looked like she'd aged years in the 6 weeks he'd been gone. Daddy, Emma threw herself into his arms with such force it nearly knocked him over. We thought you were dead. We had a funeral and everything. I'm sorry, baby, Marcus whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry I scared you. Sarah approached more cautiously. Her lawyer's eyes cataloged the changes in him, the deeper tan, the leaner frame, the way he held himself differently. When she hugged him, it felt like embracing a stranger. You look different, she said carefully. I feel different. The doctor said you had amnesia, that you couldn't remember anything. Marcus met her eyes and saw the questions there, the careful probing. Sarah had always been able to read him better than anyone. She knew something fundamental had shifted. I remembered eventually, he said, everything. A flash of something, fear, guilt, crossed her features. Everything. We need to talk, privately. The conversation took place in their Nob Hill penthouse in Marcus's study, surrounded by the monuments to his success. Awards photographs with politicians and celebrities framed articles about ConnectSphere's rise to dominance. It all felt like artifacts from someone else's life. You know, don't you, Sarah asked without preamble, about Tommy Clearwater? You've known all along. It wasn't a question. Sarah poured herself a scotch with hands that trembled slightly. I suspected from the beginning. The timing was too convenient, your big breakthrough coming right after that boy killed himself. And then later when I started digging, why didn't you say anything? Because I was pregnant with Emma. Because I wanted the life you were building for us. Because I was a coward. Sarah's voice broke. I told myself it didn't matter that the past was past. But it does matter, doesn't it? It's been eating you alive for 15 years. Marcus sank into his leather chair, exhausted by the weight of truth. I need to make this right. You can't bring him back, Marcus. No, but I can give back what I stole. I can tell the world what really happened and destroy everything we've built, Emma's future, our family's fond security. Emma's future is already destroyed if it's built on blood money. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring into her glass. Finally, she said, "There's something else you need to know. While you were gone, David Chen made his move. He convinced the board that the company needed stable leadership, especially after your disappearance. They've restructured the organization. He's trying to push me out. He's already pushed you out. Technically, you're still CEO, but all operational control has been transferred to him. And Marcus," Sarah met his eyes, "Gabriel Chen has been asking questions, specific questions about the early days of Connect Sphere, about Tommy Clearwater, about you." The cold was back in Marcus's stomach. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest he knows exactly what happened 15 years ago. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Hartwell." The voice was young male, carefully controlled. "This is Gabriel Chen. I think it's time we had a conversation." They met at midnight in Golden Gate Park near the AIDS Memorial Grove, a place of reflection and remembrance that seemed fitting for what was about to unfold. Gabriel was waiting on a bench, a laptop case beside him, looking younger than his 28 years. "You look different than in the photos," Gabriel said as Marcus approached. "Healthier, like you've been cleansed somehow." "What do you want, Gabriel?" "Justice for Tommy Clearwater." The name hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus sat heavily on the bench, suddenly feeling every one of his 42 years. "How much do you know?" "Everything." Gabriel opened his laptop, showing Marcus a screen full of code. "I've been reverse engineering ConnectSphere's original platform for 2 years, comparing it to Tommy's work, his Spirit Circle prototype. They're identical, Marcus, line for line, function for function. You didn't just steal his idea, you stole his exact implementation." "I know." Gabriel blinked, clearly having expected denial. "You're admitting it. What's the point of lying now?" Marcus studied the young man's face, seeing Tommy's intensity, Tommy's passion for justice. "You're not just David's son, are you? This is personal for you." "Tommy was my mentor. When I was 13 after my mother died, I was angry, destructive, getting into trouble. Tommy volunteered at the community center where my father sent me for counseling. He taught me to code, showed me how technology could be a force for good instead of destruction." Gabriel's voice grew thick with emotion. "He saved my life, Marcus, and you destroyed his." "Yes, I did." "Just like that. No excuses, no justification." "There is no justification for what I did. Tommy trusted me, believed in me, and I betrayed that trust for money and power. I've been living with that knowledge for 15 years. Gabriel slammed the laptop shut. "Living with it? You've been profiting from it, building an empire on his grave." "You're right. Stop saying that." Gabriel stood pacing in front of the bench. "You're supposed to fight back, make excuses, try to destroy my evidence. You're supposed to be the monster I've been hunting. Maybe I was that monster, but 6 weeks on an island with your victim's sister tends to change a person's perspective." Gabriel froze. "What did you just say?" "Mary Clearwater, Tommy's sister. She's the one who saved my life after the crash." "That's impossible. Mary lives on Kahia Island, about 30 miles off the Oregon coast. She's been there for 3 years protecting a Cherokee sacred site." Marcus met Gabriel's eyes. "She knew who I was from the first day. She could have let me die, should have let me die. Instead, she taught me how to live." Gabriel sank back onto the bench, his carefully constructed world of clear heroes and villains suddenly complicated. "I was going to destroy you," he said quietly. "I've spent 2 years building a case, collecting evidence. I was going to release everything tomorrow, the 15th anniversary of Tommy's death. Crash your stock price, destroy your reputation, send you to prison. You still can. But if Mary saved you, If she forgave you, she didn't forgive me. She helped me become someone worthy of forgiveness. There's a difference. They sat in silence for several minutes, the city lights twinkling around them like fallen stars. What happens now? Gabriel asked finally. Now I do what I should have done 15 years ago. I tell the truth. The press conference was scheduled for the next morning, October 15th, exactly 15 years after Tommy Clearwater's death. Marcus stood before a room full of reporters, photographers, and ConnectSphere executives, feeling calmer than he had in decades. David Chen sat in the front row, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. He'd clearly expected Marcus to return and resume business as usual, not blow up the entire company with a public confession. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. I called this press conference to tell you about a young man named Thomas Clearwater and how his death made possible everything you see before you today. The story poured out of him, all of it, every sordid detail of his betrayal. The stolen code, the fraudulent patents, the systematic erasure of Tommy's contributions to what became ConnectSphere. He spoke for 40 minutes without notes, the words coming easily now that he'd finally decided to release them. The room was dead silent when he finished. Effective immediately, Marcus continued, I am resigning as CEO of ConnectSphere Technologies. I am also announcing the establishment of the Thomas Clearwater Foundation, which will receive my entire stake in the company, approximately $12 billion, to be used for preserving indigenous cultures and supporting Native American technology initiatives. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and David Chen's face went white as he realized his coup had just become irrelevant. There was no company left to steal. Mr. Hartwell, a reporter called out, are you facing criminal charges? Will you be going to prison? That's for the authorities to decide. I've already spoken with the FBI and the SEC. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from my actions. What about your family? Your daughter? Marcus's voice softened. My daughter deserves a father she can be proud of. I hope that someday she will be. As the chaos swirled around him, Marcus caught sight of Gabriel in the crowd. The young man was staring at him with something that might have been respect, or at least understanding. After the press conference, Marcus retreated to his office one last time to collect his personal belongings. He was surprised to find Sarah waiting for him. That was brave, she said quietly. That was overdue. Emma doesn't understand yet. She's angry, confused. She thinks you've destroyed our family. Maybe I have. No, Sarah moved closer, and for the first time since his return, her touch felt genuine. You've finally given us a chance to build something real. Something not based on lies. Can you forgive me, for Tommy, for the deception, for all of it? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I don't know yet, but I'm willing to try, if you are. It wasn't absolution, but it was a beginning. 3 months later, Marcus stood once again on the beach where he'd washed ashore. The Thomas Clearwater Foundation was operational with Gabriel as its technology director and Mary as its cultural advisor. The legal proceedings were ongoing: civil suits, criminal investigations, regulatory reviews, but Marcus faced them with the kind of peace he'd never thought possible. I wasn't sure you'd come, Mary said, approaching from the tree line. I wasn't sure you'd want me to. She joined him at the water's edge, watching the waves roll in with their eternal rhythm. How are you holding up? Better than I expected. The truth is actually easier to live with than the lies were. And your family? Emma's starting to understand. It'll take time, but we're talking. Really talking, maybe for the first time. Marcus picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his palm. Sarah filed for divorce last week. I'm sorry. Don't be, it's what we both need. We're going to co-parent Emma, try to be friends. But our marriage was built on too many compromises with conscience. Mary nodded, understanding without judgment. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, two people who had shared something profound and unrepeatable. The foundation is doing good work, Mary said eventually. Gabriel has Tommy's passion, but tempered with wisdom. He's designing platforms that truly serve indigenous communities instead of exploiting them. Tommy would be proud. Yes, I think he would. Marcus turned to face her fully. Do you think, is there any chance that we... No, Mary's voice was gentle but firm. What we had was beautiful, but it belonged to a specific time and place. You're not the same man who loved me on this island, and I'm not the same woman who loved him back. I know, I just had to ask. We're both different people now. Better people, I hope. But that means we want different things, need different futures. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Mary reached into her bag and pulled out a small object, the carved stone pendant she'd given him during his recovery. I want you to keep this, she said, placing it in his palm. Not as a reminder of what we lost, but of what we found. You discovered you could be a good man, Marcus. Don't forget that when the world tries to convince you otherwise. Marcus closed his fingers around the pendant, feeling its familiar weight. Thank you for everything. Thank you for choosing to change. As darkness fell, they walked back toward the cabin together. But Marcus knew this was goodbye. Not the bitter ending he'd feared, but a gentle closing of one chapter and the opening of another. Epilogue. 2 years later. The courtroom was packed for the sentencing hearing. Marcus had pled guilty to multiple felony charges, fraud, theft of intellectual property, securities violations. The judge had the discretion to sentence him to up to 20 years in federal prison. Emma sat in the front row next to Sarah, her 13-year-old face serious beyond her years. Behind them, Gabriel Chen and several members of the Cherokee Nation, including tribal elders, who had flown in specifically for this hearing. Mary was there too in the back row, wearing traditional dress that marked this as a ceremonial occasion. Mr. Hartwell, Judge Patricia Nakamura, said, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. You've admitted to crimes that destroyed a young man's life and built your fortune on his stolen work. Normally, such actions would warrant the maximum sentence. Marcus stood straight, prepared for whatever came next. However, the judge continued, the court has received over 300 letters on your behalf. Letters from Cherokee tribal leaders, from students receiving scholarships through the Clearwater Foundation, from technology workers whose lives have been changed by your organization's programs. She paused, looking directly at Marcus. More importantly, the victim's family has specifically requested mercy. Mary Clearwater has testified that her brother would have wanted his legacy to be about healing and building bridges, not about revenge. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. The court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison with the possibility of supervised release after 2 years, contingent on your continued cooperation with ongoing investigations and your work with the Clearwater Foundation. As the gavel fell, Marcus turned to find Emma's eyes. His daughter stood up, and for the first time since his confession, she smiled at him, a small, tentative expression of forgiveness that meant more than any legal mercy. Later, as Marcus was led away to begin his sentence, he caught one last glimpse of Mary through the courthouse window. She was standing with Gabriel and several tribal elders, and as their eyes met, she placed her hand over her heart and nodded once. A gesture of respect, of closure, of hope for whatever came next. 5 years later, Marcus emerged from federal prison on a crisp October morning, exactly 7 years after the helicopter crash that had changed everything. Gabriel was waiting for him in the parking lot, now 33, and bearing the confident bearing of someone who had found his purpose. How does it feel? Gabriel asked as they drove towards San Francisco. Strange, good, terrifying. Marcus watched the familiar landscape roll by. How's the foundation? Thriving. We've launched digital preservation projects for 47 tribes, created technology training programs that have graduated over 2,000 students and funded 12 indigenous-led startups. Gabriel's voice carried the satisfaction of meaningful work. Tommy's vision is finally becoming reality. And Mary, remarried last year, a marine biologist who shares her passion for conservation. They're expecting their first child. Gabriel glanced at Marcus. She's happy, Marcus. Really happy. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions, loss, joy, gratitude. Good. She deserves happiness. They drove to a small apartment in Oakland that the foundation had arranged for Marcus's transition back to civilian life. It was modest, a far cry from his former penthouse, but it felt like home in a way the luxury had never managed. Emma was waiting inside. Now 18 and starting her freshman year at UC Berkeley, she had grown into a poised young woman with her mother's intelligence and what Marcus hoped was his newfound wisdom. Dad, she hugged him fiercely. Welcome back. How's college? Challenging. I'm majoring in social justice with a focus on technology ethics. She smiled. Someone once told me that tech should be used to build bridges, not burn them down. That evening, the three of them, Marcus, Emma, and Gabriel, sat on the apartment's small balcony, sharing takeout Chinese food and watching the sun set over the Bay Area. In the distance, Marcus could see the ConnectSphere building, now renamed the Clearwater Center, and serving as headquarters for the foundation. "What will you do now?" Emma asked. "I'm not sure yet. The foundation has offered me a position entry level, of course. I have to rebuild trust to earn my place." Marcus looked at his daughter. "But I'd like to teach if they'll have me. Share what I've learned about the cost of success without conscience." "You mean about failure?" "No." Marcus smiled. "About the difference between winning and succeeding. I won everything I thought I wanted, but I didn't succeed at anything that mattered until I lost it all." As night fell over the city, Marcus felt something he had spent decades chasing, but never found a sense of genuine peace. Not the artificial calm of wealth and power, but the deep satisfaction of a life finally aligned with its values. He thought of Tommy Clearwater, the young man whose death had made all of this possible. He thought of Mary, who had saved his life by teaching him how to lose it. He thought of Gabriel, who had found a way to channel his anger into healing. And he thought of Emma, who would never have to carry the burden of inheriting an empire built on blood. The tide had broken, washing away the false foundations of his old life. What remained was smaller, simpler, but infinitely more precious, the chance to spend whatever years he had left, building something worthy of the man he'd finally learned to become. In the distance, a foghorn sounded from the Golden Gate Bridge that spanned between worlds, where Tommy Clearwater had chosen to end his story so that eventually others might begin theirs. Marcus Hartwell closed his eyes and listened to the sound, a benediction for the dead and a promise to the living. The tide had broken. But sometimes that's exactly what it takes to wash the shore clean. The end.